These are true horror stories about what happens when you're home alone and something else is there with you. This happened last winter in Michigan when my roommate left for the holidays and I stayed behind to work. I'm 24 and work remotely as a software developer. My roommate Jake had gone home to visit family for 2 weeks over Christmas. I decided to stay. The extra quiet time to focus on a project deadline seemed like a good trade. Our apartment is on the second floor of an old building in Ann Arbor. 2 bedrooms, a living room with a large window facing the street. Below that window, there's a metal fire escape. Old, narrow, probably hasn't been used in years. The first week alone was fine. I worked during the day, made dinner, watched TV at night. Standard routine. It snowed a few times, nothing major, just enough to make everything look clean and quiet. December 20th, that's when it started. I woke up around 3 a.m., freezing. My bedroom was cold, the heater struggling to keep up with the Michigan winter. I couldn't fall back asleep. I got up and went to the kitchen to make tea, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. I filled the kettle and turned it on, then walked into the living room while I waited. The window was frosted over, normal for this time of year, but there was something on the glass. A handprint. Palm and 5 fingers, pressed against the frosted glass like someone had placed their hand there and held it. The condensation had frozen around it, making the print sharp and clear. I stood there staring at it. I couldn't tell if it had been made from inside or outside. The frost covered both sides of the glass, and the print itself was just a void in the condensation, impossible to read which direction it came from. But the fire escape was right there, just outside. Someone could stand on it, reach the window easily. I looked closer. The handprint was positioned at an angle, fingers pointing slightly upward, like someone had been standing below, reaching up. I told myself I must have touched it earlier and forgotten, maybe while looking outside at the snow. I went back to bed. When I woke up around 8 a.m. and walked past the living room window, the handprint was gone, just clean frost. December 21st. I was brushing my teeth when I remembered the handprint from the night before. I walked into the living room, toothbrush still in my mouth. The window was clear, just frost, no print. I felt relieved. I went to work, came home around 6 p.m. I wasn't thinking about the window until I unlocked the front door and walked inside. I glanced at the living room window automatically. Nothing. Still clear. I dropped my bag, took off my coat, walked to the kitchen to get water. When I came back into the living room 2 minutes later, the handprint was on the window. Fresh, sharp, like someone had just pressed their hand there seconds ago. I felt my chest go tight. I walked up to it slowly, looked at the print up close. It was bigger than mine. The fingers were longer, and it was positioned exactly like before. Same spot, same angle. I pulled out my phone and took a photo. I called Jake. I asked him if he'd ever noticed handprints on the living room window. He laughed, said no. Asked why I was asking. I explained what I'd been seeing, that it kept appearing. He went quiet for a second, then said it was probably condensation doing something weird. Old buildings, bad ventilation. I said yeah, probably, but I didn't believe it. And that night I set up my laptop on the coffee table, aimed the webcam at the window, and started recording before going to bed. December 22nd, the handprint was back. I checked the laptop immediately. The recording had stopped around 3 a.m. The battery had died. I scrubbed through what I had. 5 hours of footage before it shut down. Fast forward, watching for any movement near the window. Nothing happened. The window stayed clear the entire time the camera was on. No hand, no shadow, but the print was right there in front of me. It had appeared sometime after 3 a.m. when the laptop died. I walked up and held my hand next to it for comparison. Definitely larger, and the edges of the fingers were smudged slightly downward, like the hand had slid before pulling away. I barely slept that night. December 23rd, nothing. I felt relieved. December 24th, Christmas Eve. 2 handprints now, one in the usual spot, another lower, near the bottom corner. Both hands pressed flat. I called the building manager. I told him I thought someone might be getting inside somehow. He came up 20 minutes later, checked the locks, inspected the windows, looked around. Everything was secure. No signs of entry. He gave me a look, asked if I was staying alone for the holidays. I said yeah. He suggested I get out for a bit, see some people. Said being cooped up too long messes with your head. He left. That night I sat on the couch in the dark, facing the window, watching. Hours passed. The street outside stayed empty. The window stayed clear. At 4 a.m., I gave up and went to bed. December 25th. Christmas morning. I woke up around 8 a.m. and checked the living room window. No handprint. I felt genuine relief, like maybe it had finally stopped. I made coffee, checked my email, answered messages from my family. Around 10 a.m., I went to take a shower. I turned the water as hot as it would go and got in the tub, stayed under the spray for a while, trying to relax. When I finished, I turned off the water, pulled back the curtain, and stepped out onto the bath mat. The mirror was completely fogged over. I grabbed my towel and dried off. Then sat down on the edge of the tub for a minute, just breathing, letting myself relax. That's when I saw it, on the mirror. 4 vertical lines forming in the condensation, slowly, like fingers dragging down through the fog. Right in front of me. I couldn't move. The lines finished. The motion stopped. The bathroom was silent except for the sound of water dripping from the shower head. I was alone in the room, but someone had just touched that mirror. I grabbed my phone off the sink with shaking hands and ran out of the bathroom, checked every room, every closet, under the beds. Nothing. I called 911. 2 officers showed up within 20 minutes. I explained everything. The handprints, the marks on the mirror, the timeline. They checked the apartment. There's the locks. You're the fire escape. One of them asked if anyone else had a key. I said just my roommate. He's out of town. They asked if maintenance had been by recently. Anyone from the building? I said no. They exchanged looks. They said they'd file a report, increase patrol, but there was no sign of forced entry. They told me to keep my doors locked, and they left. I packed a bag and drove to my parents' house that afternoon. Jake got back on January 2nd. I told him everything. He thought I'd cracked because of the isolation. Too much time alone. Maybe too much stress at work. Maybe. But 2 weeks later, Jake called me. He'd been cleaning the windows. He said there was something weird on the outside of the living room window. Scratches. Dozens of thin scratches clustered together in the same spots where the handprints had been. Like someone had been scraping at the glass with their fingernails. For weeks. This happened last October in Northern California when I rented an Airbnb for a weekend away from work and needed a break. I'd been working 12-hour days for months and finally had a 3-day weekend. I found a small cabin listed near Mount Shasta, 1 bedroom, wood stove, wraparound porch, secluded. The photos looked perfect. The host's name was Margaret, older woman, based on her profile photo. 5-star reviews. The listing said she lived nearby if I needed anything. I arrived Friday evening just before sunset. The cabin was exactly like the photos, small but clean. The wood stove was already set up with kindling. There was a welcome note on the kitchen counter with the Wi-Fi password and emergency numbers. I unpacked, made dinner, spent the evening reading by the fire. Around 11 p.m., I went to bed. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound. Not loud, just faint enough that I wasn't sure if I'd actually heard it or dreamed it. Static, like white noise, coming from somewhere in the cabin. I sat up and listened. There it was again, soft, rhythmic, coming from the living room maybe, or the closet near the bedroom door. I got up and walked into the living room, turning on lights as I went. Nothing. The wood stove had died down to embers. The cabin was silent. I checked the kitchen, the bathroom. Nothing. The sound had stopped. I went back to bed, telling myself it was probably the heating system or something settling in the walls. Saturday I spent the day hiking, came back exhausted around 6 p.m, made dinner, and fell asleep on the couch watching a movie. I woke up around midnight and dragged myself to the bedroom. That's when I heard it again. Static, louder this time, definitely coming from inside the bedroom. I turned on the light and looked around. The sound was coming from the closet. I walked over and opened the door. On the top shelf, half hidden behind some folded blankets, there was a baby monitor. The old kind, white plastic, boxy, with a small screen. It was on. The screen glowed faint green in the dark, night vision mode. The static was coming from the speaker. I pulled it down and looked at it. The screen showed a room, dark, empty, grainy night vision footage. I couldn't tell what room it was showing, but it wasn't the bedroom I was standing in. I frowned. Why would there be a baby monitor hidden in an Airbnb closet? I found the power button and turned it off. The screen went black. The static stopped. I set it back on the shelf and closed the closet door. Weird, but not alarming. Maybe Margaret's grandkids visited sometimes, and she forgot to take it out. I went to bed. Sunday morning I slept in late. Woke up around 9 a.m, feeling more rested than I had in weeks. I made coffee, sat on the porch, enjoyed the quiet. Around noon, I went back inside to grab my book from the bedroom. The closet door was open. I stopped. I'd closed it last night. I was sure of it. I walked over slowly. The baby monitor was on the nightstand now, plugged into the wall, turned on, screen glowing green. My chest tightened. I picked it up. The screen showed the same dark room, but now I could see more detail. A bed, a window, a dresser. It was showing my bedroom. The angle was from above, looking down, like the camera was mounted high on a wall or ceiling, but there was no camera in this room. I'd looked around when I first arrived. There was nothing. I turned the monitor toward the ceiling, scanning for a camera. Nothing. Just bare wood beams. I looked back at the screen. The image showed my bedroom from an impossible angle, and then I heard it. Through the speaker, breathing, slow, steady, someone breathing. I stared at the screen. The room was empty, but the breathing continued, close to the microphone. I hit the power button, held it down until the screen went black, unplugged it, threw it back in the closet and closed the door. Then I checked the entire cabin, every room, every window, every lock. I was alone. Everything was secure. I texted Margaret. I asked if there was supposed to be a baby monitor in the bedroom closet. She responded 20 minutes later. She said no, they don't have one. Asked if I was sure. I sent her a photo. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. She said that wasn't theirs. She'd never seen it before. Asked if I wanted her to come get it. I looked at the closet door. I said yes. Asked if she could come by. She said she could be there in an hour. I said okay and waited in the living room. An hour passed, then 2. She didn't show up. I texted her again. No response. Around 4 p.m., I decided to just leave early, pack my stuff and go home. I walked into the bedroom to grab my bag. The baby monitor was on the nightstand again, plugged in, turned on, but this time the screen was different. It showed the living room, the couch where I'd been sitting 10 minutes earlier, the angle from the corner of the room, looking down. I felt cold. I grabbed the monitor and looked at the back of it. There was a small label, faded, handwritten, Camera 1, living room. My hands started shaking. I turned it over and looked at the screen again. The image had changed. Now it showed the bedroom, the angle from above. Me, standing there, holding the monitor. I was looking at myself, in real time. And then I saw it, in the corner of the screen. Behind me in the reflection of the bedroom mirror. A figure, standing in the shadows, watching. I spun around. Nothing. The corner was empty. I looked back at the screen. The figure was still there, standing right behind where I'd just been. I dropped the monitor. The plastic cracked when it hit the floor. The screen flickered but stayed on. I could still see myself on the screen, still see that figure in the corner, still hear that slow, steady breathing through the speaker. I grabbed my bag, my keys, my phone, didn't bother packing anything else, just ran, got in my car and drove. I tried calling Margaret from the road. No answer. I tried the Airbnb support line, explained everything. They said they'd follow up with the host and get back to me. They never did. I never left a review. And since then, I still haven't dared to rent another Airbnb. This happened in the United States, in Pennsylvania, during a winter, when I was living alone in a small house just outside a quiet town. It wasn't an old farmhouse or anything remote, just a normal place, on a normal street. The kind of house you stop noticing once it becomes routine. I had been there for a few months already, long enough for the sounds, the layout, and the rhythm of the place to feel familiar, long enough to believe I understood it. Nothing isolated, nothing unusual. A normal neighborhood, normal streets, normal routines. That was part of the problem. I had lived there for almost 3 months without incident. Long enough to stop paying attention to the sounds houses naturally make. The pipes, the heating, the subtle shifts in wood when temperatures drop at night. I worked from home, rarely had visitors, and most evenings passed quietly. Too quietly, looking back. The first thing I noticed wasn't fear, it was inconvenience. I'd wake up in the morning and find small things out of place. A chair slightly angled when I was certain I'd pushed it under the table. A door not fully closed, lights switched off that I remembered leaving on. I blame myself immediately. Routine dulls memory. Fatigue fills in gaps with confidence. One night, after finishing work late, I sat in the living room with the TV off, scrolling on my phone, listening to the house settle. Around 1:40 a.m., I heard a soft sound from the hallway. Not footsteps, more like pressure, as if weight had briefly shifted against the floor and then lifted again. I paused, holding my breath, listening harder. Nothing followed. I checked the hallway, the bathroom, the spare room. Everything looked the same. Doors locked, windows shut. I told myself the sound came from the heating system cycling and went to bed. The next morning, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The bathroom mirror was fogged. Not fully, just a faint patch in the center, like someone had leaned close to it and breathed once. The bathroom was cold. The shower hadn't been used, and I was alone. I wiped the mirror clean and stood there longer than I needed to, staring at my own reflection, feeling ridiculous for letting it bother me. That night, I slept with the bedroom door open. A few days later, I started hearing the sounds again. Always late, always subtle, the soft shift of weight, a floorboard reacting to pressure, the faintest creak, never repeating twice in the same spot. I tried staying awake one night, sitting on the edge of my bed with the lights off, just listening. Nothing happened. The sounds only came when I wasn't trying to hear them. The real change happened the night I woke up because the house felt wrong. Not loud, not quiet, just different. The air felt thicker, heavier, like it had settled lower in the room. I lay still, eyes open, listening. The heating was off. No wind outside, no traffic. Then I heard it. Not in the hallway, inside the room. It wasn't close enough to feel threatening. Not yet. It sounded like someone adjusting their footing, careful not to make noise, unfamiliar with the floor. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared at the dark outline of the doorway, waiting for something to pass in front of it. Nothing did. After what felt like minutes, the pressure lifted. The room felt normal again. Lighter. I slept eventually, convincing myself it had been a dream layered over exhaustion. Next morning, I found the bedroom door closed. I always left it open. That was the first time I checked every lock twice before leaving the house. The final night came sooner than I expected. I woke up to the sound of something dragging lightly across the floor, slow, controlled, coming from the living room. This time I didn't tell myself it was nothing. I stayed in bed, listening as the sound stopped, then resumed, then stopped again, as if whoever was making it was learning where the floor reacted and where it didn't. My phone was on the nightstand. I picked it up without unlocking it, just to see the time. 2:17 a.m. That's when I heard a soft exhale. Not near me, not far either, just close enough to belong to the room. I didn't look. I didn't move. I waited until the sound faded, until the house felt empty again, and I left at dawn. Packed what I could carry and drove to a friend's place without explaining why. I never slept in that house again. Weeks later, when I went back during the day to collect the rest of my things, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The layout of the furniture had changed. Not drastically, just optimized. Paths cleared between rooms, corners opened, obstacles removed. As if someone had been practicing moving through the space, learning how I lived. I handed the keys back that afternoon and never asked questions I wasn't prepared to hear the answers to. Because I learned something important during that winter. Some houses don't just hold people. Sometimes they adapt to them. And sometimes they do it a little too well. Here's one of my first real horror stories from when I was home alone as a teenager. It was that night I heard the sound that changed everything. I was 17 at the time, living with my parents in rural Vermont, about an hour north of Burlington. Our house was old, built in the 1920s, the kind of place with creaky floorboards and drafty windows that whistled when the wind picked up. It sat on about 3 acres of land, surrounded by fields and scattered trees. The nearest neighbor was maybe half a mile down the road. And this happened in deep winter. It had snowed the night before, covering everything in fresh powder. My parents had gone to visit my grandmother in Ohio. She had a fall, nothing too serious, but enough that my mom wanted to be there to help out for a few days. They'd asked if I wanted to come along, but I had worked that weekend, stocking shelves at the hardware store in town. I'd only had the job for a few months and didn't want to ask for time off. Looking back now, I should have gone with them. They left on a Thursday afternoon. I remember my mom going through the usual list. Don't leave the stove on, lock the doors at night, call if anything happens, there's food in the freezer. I nodded along. Yes, Mom, I'll lock the doors. Who's going to come all the way out here anyway? She gave me that look. You know the one that says she's not joking. As soon as their car disappeared down the driveway, I felt that strange mix of freedom and responsibility that comes with being alone in a house. The quiet settled in fast, heavier than I expected. That first night was fine. I made myself dinner, watched TV, went to bed around midnight. The house made its usual sounds, the furnace kicking on, the wood settling, nothing out of the ordinary. I slept straight through until my alarm went off at 6 for my shift. Friday was normal too. Work, came home, heated up leftovers. I called my parents around 8 to let them know everything was good. My mom asked if I was keeping the doors locked. I told her yes, even though I'd only locked the front door and hadn't bothered with the back. We lived in the middle of nowhere. Who was going to come all the way out here? It was Friday night when things started. I was in the living room watching a movie, probably around 11. That's when the sound cut through everything. A single knock on the back door. Not loud, not aggressive, just 3 soft taps. I muted the TV and sat there listening, my hand frozen on the remote. Nothing, just the hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the sound of my own breathing. I figured maybe it was a branch or something hitting the door in the wind, even though there wasn't much wind that night. Even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. I got up and walked to the kitchen, turned on the back porch light, and looked out through the window in the door. Nothing, just the empty porch and the dark yard beyond. I stood there for a minute, hand on the doorknob, debating whether to open it. Something stopped me. Maybe it was the way the knock had sounded, too measured, too purposeful. I flipped the lock instead and went back to the living room, turned the movie back on. About an hour later, it happened again. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, walked back to the kitchen. I didn't turn on the porch light this time, I just shined my phone through the window. Still nothing. I unlocked the door, opened it a crack, and looked out. The porch was empty, the yard was dark and still. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded small and stupid in the quiet. No response. I closed the door, locked it, and this time I made sure the deadbolt was turned too. Then I went around the whole first floor and checked every window, every door. Everything was locked. I told myself it was fine. Maybe it was an animal, maybe it was nothing. But I didn't believe that. I tried to keep watching the movie, but I couldn't focus. Every sound the house made, every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the windows, I was listening for it, waiting for another knock. It didn't come that night. I barely slept. I kept my bedroom door locked and my phone next to my pillow. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear something, a sound from downstairs, and I'd be awake again, staring at the ceiling. Saturday morning, I felt like hell. I went to work on maybe 3 hours of sleep, and the whole shift I kept thinking about those knocks. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, or that it really had been something harmless, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been standing on that porch, looking in at me through the dark. And I kept thinking about my mom. The way she'd insisted I lock the doors. The way she'd looked at me when I made that joke, like she knew something. Why hadn't she said more? When I got home around 4, the first thing I did was walk around the outside of the house. I checked the back porch, the area around the door, looking for footprints or any sign that someone had been there. The snow was untouched, fresh, like no one had walked there at all, but I knew what I'd heard. Those weren't branches. That night I made sure every door and every window was locked before the sun even went down. I kept the lights on in most of the house. I didn't want any dark corners, any places where I couldn't see. Around 9, my phone rang. It was my parents. I told them everything was fine. I didn't mention the knocks. What would I even say? That I heard a noise and got scared? I was 17. I wasn't going to sound like a kid who couldn't handle being alone. After I hung up, I sat in the living room with the TV on, but I wasn't really watching. I was listening, waiting. And then, at exactly 11:13 p.m., I know because I checked my phone, it happened again. This time they were on the front door. My stomach dropped. I didn't move. I just sat there on the couch, frozen, staring at the front door from across the room. The knocks didn't come again, just those 3, and then silence. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. Finally I stood up, grabbed the baseball bat we kept by the coat closet and walked slowly to the door. My chest was pulsing and my hands were shaking. I looked through the peephole. Nothing, just the empty porch and the driveway beyond, lit by the porch light. I backed away, clutching the bat, when suddenly I heard the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow on the side of the house. Slow footsteps moving back and forth. My whole body froze. Someone was there. Someone was walking around my house. I ran as quietly as possible to the kitchen window and looked out toward the back porch. The snow was lit by the porch light, and now I could see them. Footprints. Fresh footprints in the snow, leading from the side of the house to the back door, and they went all the way around the house. I could see the trail in the snow, a complete loop around the property, ending right at the back porch. And then I saw the silhouette. It entered the perimeter, lit by the porch light, and stopped. Only its legs were visible from about the knees down, the rest of its body in shadow. It was wearing dark pants, maybe jeans. Normal shoes, not boots. But then I saw something else, something dragging in the snow beside the figure, a long handle, and at the end of it, the unmistakable shape of an axe head cutting a thin line through the snow as the figure shifted its weight. And the arm holding it. The arm looked wrong. Too long. It's the way it hung there, the axe dragging behind. The proportions didn't make sense, like the arm extended further than it should. The figure didn't move forward, it just stood there, motionless, the axe scraping slightly in the snow every time it adjusted its grip, just standing at the edge of the light, waiting. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone when I fumbled for it to call 911. My voice came out thin and shaky when the dispatcher answered. I told them someone was outside my house, that I was alone, that I needed help, right now. The dispatcher, a woman with a calm voice that somehow made it worse, told me to stay inside, keep the doors locked, that a deputy was on the way. She stayed on the line with me. She asked me questions. Where was I in the house? Were all the doors locked? Could I still see the person? I kept watching the back door. The figure didn't move. They just stood there at the edge of the light, like they were waiting for something. Like they had all the time in the world. I couldn't see their face. I couldn't see anything above their waist, just their legs, standing perfectly still on my back porch. The dispatcher asked me if I could describe them. I said I couldn't see them clearly. She asked if they were trying to get in. I said no, they were just standing there. And then they moved, not toward the door. They took one step back into the darkness and disappeared. I ran to the living room window that faced the side yard and looked out. Nothing. I couldn't see anyone. I went to the front window. The driveway was empty. I checked every window I could see from, and there was no one. They were gone. The deputy showed up about 15 minutes later. I saw his lights first, red and blue flashing through the front windows, then heard his car in the driveway. I let him in, still holding the baseball bat. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with a tired expression that suggested this wasn't his first call about strange noises in the night. He asked me what happened, and I told him everything. The knocking over the past 2 nights, the footsteps around the house, the figure standing at the edge of the porch light. He wrote it all down in a little notebook, nodding occasionally. Then he walked around the outside of the house with his flashlight, checked the porch, the yard, the driveway. I watched from the window. His flashlight swept across the snow and trees at the edge of the property. He was out there for maybe 10 minutes. When he came back, he said he didn't see anyone. No disturbing footprints in the snow, nothing that had been disturbed. He asked if I'd seen the person's face. I said no. He asked if they'd tried to open any doors or windows. I said no, they'd just knocked and walked around. He asked if I'd had any arguments with anyone recently, any problems at school or work, anyone who might want to mess with me. I said no. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to decide something. Finally, he said it could have been kids, or maybe someone drunk who got lost and ended up at the wrong house. He told me to keep everything locked and to call again if anything else happened. His tone suggested he didn't think anything else would happen, that maybe I'd overreacted to some nothing situation. Then he left. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the living room with every light on and the bat in my lap, watching the doors, listening for any sound. Nothing happened. No knocks, no footsteps. Just silence. My parents came home Sunday afternoon. I didn't tell them what happened. I didn't want to deal with the questions, the worry, the way they'd look at me. I just said everything had been fine. But a few weeks later, my father confided in me. He had spoken to our neighbor who lived about a kilometer away from us. Apparently, he had also heard the knocks. The same pattern, 3 knocks, every night for a week. But one night, he had opened the door. My father just said that the neighbor had been in the hospital ever since, and really, he didn't want to say more. I never told my dad that it had happened to us too, but I think about it all the time. About how whoever it was had been doing this to multiple houses. About how they'd just stand there at the edge of the light waiting. About what they were waiting for. And I wonder what would have happened if I had opened the door.